The Galactic Council was in session, their grand chamber filled with the most powerful leaders of the known universe. The room itself was massive, with golden pillars reaching high into the ceiling, holographic displays showing maps of the stars, and delegates seated in floating platforms arranged in a vast circle. Every species in the galaxy had a representative here, some tall and insect-like, others covered in scales, some with glowing eyes and long flowing robes. Today's discussion, however, was not about war or alliances. It was about something the Council found amusing. Humans. They are nothing but primitives, scoffed High Warlord Salvok of the Drex Dominion, a reptilian creature with sharp black scales and piercing yellow eyes. Their weapons are outdated, their ships are weak, their armies are small, yet they still dare to call themselves a force in the galaxy. Laughter echoed through the chamber. The Drex were one of the strongest military empires in existence, their fleets covering entire star systems. To them, humanity was nothing more than a minor species with no real power. Ambassador Velfar of the Karathi, a species of floating jellyfish-like beings, waved a tentacle dismissively. I have studied them. They lack proper fleets. They barely control a handful of planets. They rely on diplomacy rather than force. No real threat. Another round of laughter filled the hall. To the great powers of the galaxy, strength was measured in warships, conquests, and the ability to crush enemies without mercy. But one figure in the room remained silent. Seated at a simple desk was Ambassador Ryan Carter, the only human in the chamber. Unlike the others, he wore no grand robe, no ceremonial armor, just a formal black suit. His expression was unreadable as he listened to their mockery. When the laughter finally died down, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "You think humanity is weak," he said in a calm, measured voice. "You believe we are powerless. You assume that because we do not conquer, we cannot fight." Silence. Some council members smirked. Others rolled their eyes. Ryan continued, his voice growing colder. "We are patient. We watch. We learn. And when the time comes, we strike." High Warlord Salvok let out a deep chuckle. "Strike with what? Your old rusted ships? Your tiny fleets?" He grinned, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Your words mean nothing, human." Ryan Carter stood up. His gaze moved across the room, staring at every alien leader. "You believe we are nothing. You mock our history. You dismiss our strength. I am here to warn you, one last time." His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried through the chamber like a ghostly wind. "Do not mistake our silence for weakness." For a moment, the hall was quiet. Then, more laughter. This time, even louder than before. Ryan simply nodded. "I see," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber without another word. As soon as he left, Salvok grinned at his fellow warlords. "Enough of this nonsense. We will crush their pathetic colonies and show them what real power looks like." Ambassador Velfar agreed. "The humans do not belong in this council. It is time we remind them of their place." And so, the decision was made. The Drex Dominion, one of the most feared empires in the galaxy, declared war on humanity. Their fleets moved quickly, launching an attack on a human colony near the outer rim. Hundreds of Drex warships, massive and bristling with weapons, approached the planet, expecting an easy victory. But something was wrong. As they arrived in orbit, their scanners picked up nothing. No human fleet, no defense systems, no signals. The colony looked abandoned. Salvok frowned. "Where is their military?" An officer checked the sensors. "No human ships detected, my lord." A deep laugh rumbled in Salvok's throat. "They ran away." Pathetic. He raised his clawed hand. "Burn the planet." Just as his command was about to be executed, the first Drex battleship exploded. Without warning, without a visible enemy, it was simply erased from existence. Alarms blared across the fleet. Officers screamed in confusion. Then another ship vanished. And another. Then the shadows moved, and humanity's judgment began. The Drex Dominion was one of the most feared military empires in the galaxy. Their fleets had conquered hundreds of worlds, crushed countless civilizations, and burned entire planets to the ground. But now, their unstoppable fleet was under attack, and they had no idea how. Aboard the Drex command ship, Warbringer, High Warlord Salvok stood frozen, his yellow eyes locked onto the holographic display in front of him. It showed his mighty fleet being destroyed, not in battle, not in a fair fight, but in complete silence. Ship after ship disappeared from the screen. Not exploded, not damaged, just gone. "This is impossible," Salvok growled, his sharp claws digging into the armrests of his command chair. "Where is the enemy fleet?" The bridge crew scrambled for answers. Officers tapped furiously on their control panels, scanning for any sign of an attacking force. "There is no enemy fleet, my lord." One officer shouted in panic. "We detect nothing. No ships, no weapons fire, no transmissions." Another Drex battleship vanished from the screen. Salvok's heart pounded. This was not a battle. This was a massacre. Elsewhere in the fleet, aboard the Drex cruiser Devourer, Captain Goreth's breathing was heavy. He gripped the edge of his command console, his scaled hands shaking. His crew was screaming. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and every attempt to contact the flagship failed. "We're being hunted," his second-in-command whispered, eyes wide with fear. Goreth didn't want to believe it, but there was no other explanation. Something was here, something they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't fight. Then the shadows moved. For a split second, the ship's sensors flickered. Something appeared on the scanners, just for a moment, before disappearing again. A cold chill ran down Goreth's spine. Then he saw it. A shape. A massive black warship, barely visible against the darkness of space. Sleek, silent, deadly. It was like a ghost, appearing only for a heartbeat before vanishing again. Then the Devourer shook violently. "Something's inside." A soldier screamed. Metal groaned. The lights flickered. And then, darkness. Back on the Warbringer. "All ships, retreat." Salvok roared, slamming his fist against the command console. Now. Now. But it was too late. The Ghost Fleet had arrived. For the first time in Drex history, they were not the hunters. They were the prey. And humanity had come to collect. The Drex fleet was dying. Not in battle, not in an honorable fight, but in complete and utter silence. Ships vanished without a trace. Sensors detected nothing. Weapons locked onto empty space. No transmissions. No warnings. The unstoppable Drex Dominion had become helpless prey. Aboard the Warbringer, High Warlord Salvok could not comprehend what was happening. He had fought hundreds of battles, conquered entire systems, and crushed rebellions without hesitation. But this was not war. It was something else. "Commander Tovak, report." He barked, his voice shaking slightly. The officer swallowed hard. "My lord, we still detect no enemy ships." But he hesitated. "But what?" Tovak turned, his scales pale. "There are voices." Salvok's blood ran cold. Voices. The officer nodded slowly, his hands trembling. "Across all channels. In our heads. They whisper, laugh, taunt." He took a shaky breath. "They say, 'We see you.'" Salvok clenched his fists. This was impossible. The Drex had technology that could break the minds of lesser species. They had mind shields, countermeasures, the most advanced cyber warfare in the galaxy. But somehow, humanity was inside their minds. Aboard the Drex battleship Devourer, Captain Goreth gritted his teeth. His ship was dying. The lights flickered. The metal groaned. The crew screamed. Then the walls bled. Not real blood. It was an illusion, a trick, but it looked, smelled, and felt real. His officers clawed at their faces, tearing at their skin as if something was inside them. Others collapsed, screaming about shadows moving through the ship. "Focus!" Goreth roared, forcing himself to stand. "This is a trick." But then, a voice echoed through the ship. It was calm, cold, human. "You burned our colonies," it said, "slaughtered our civilians, laughed at our warnings." A pause. "Now, you will know fear." The lights cut out, and the devourer was gone. On the Warbringer, Zalvok's claws dug into his armrests. His entire fleet was being erased. One by one, ship by ship. Silence. Then, a single transmission came through. A human voice. Deep, calm, unshaken. "You call yourselves conquerors." The voice was closer. "You call yourselves gods." Zalvok felt something cold in his chest. But what are gods? The Warbringer's lights flickered. To the ones who haunt the dark. Silence. Then, the ghost fleet attacked. Zalvok had faced death before. He had fought in the bloodiest battles of the Drek's dominion, crushed entire civilizations, and witnessed countless enemies fall before his might. But never, never had he faced something like this. His fleet, once mighty and unstoppable, was being torn apart by an enemy they could not see. Ships were vanishing. Not destroyed. Not exploding into fire and wreckage. Just gone. One moment, a ship was there, fully operational, crew alive, systems functional. The next moment, nothing. No wreckage, no distress calls, no emergency beacons, just empty space. Aboard the Warbringer, the bridge was in chaos. Officers shouted over one another, desperate for answers. The greatest warship of the Drek's dominion was supposed to be untouchable, unstoppable. Yet, for the first time, it was afraid. Zalvok slammed his fist against his chair. "I want a full scan of the sector. Find those humans. Find them now." His science officer, a trembling Drex named Sorvin, turned with hollow eyes. My lord, there are no enemy ships." Zalvok's chest tightened. "That is impossible." Sorvin swallowed. "We detected something, briefly. A movement, a distortion, but it wasn't physical." He hesitated, then forced himself to continue. "It was inside our own systems." Zalvok's claws dug into his armrests. "A cyber attack." Sorvin shook his head. "No. Worse." He took a deep breath. "It's inside our minds." Aboard the Drek's battleship Iron Fang, Captain Tarzol struggled to breathe. His crew was losing their sanity. They heard whispers in the halls, saw shadows moving through the ship. Some claimed they could feel something watching them, crawling into their thoughts, pulling at their fears. Then, the lights flickered. Tarzol turned as his first officer let out a choking gasp. His eyes widened in horror. The Drek's officer's body froze in place, like a puppet held up by invisible strings. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Then he was gone, vanished. His uniform collapsed onto the floor, as if his body had been ripped out of existence. Crew members screamed. Some ran. Others dropped their weapons, sobbing in terror. Tarzol grabbed the nearest officer. "What is happening?" The officer's face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Thethir, inside." Tarzol's blood ran cold. Who is inside?" The officer's lips trembled. "The humans." Then the ship shook violently, and the Iron Fang was erased from existence. On the Warbringer, Zalvok watched as another battleship vanished, gone, just like the others. His mind screamed for logic, for reason. Where were the human ships? Where were the energy signatures? The weapons fire, the explosions. But there was nothing. Just silence. Then, the lights went dark. The bridge was plunged into shadow. A deep, low hum filled the air. A sound so alien, so unnatural, that it sent shivers through every crew member. Then, A voice. Not through the ship's speakers. Not over a transmission. Inside their minds. You came to conquer. Zalvok's breath hitched. The voice was calm, cold, human. You laughed at our myths. A chill ran down his spine. You thought we were weak. The air felt heavy. But you never asked what happened to those who came before you. The hum grew louder. It felt like it was inside his skull. They're still here. Zalvok's hands shook. Woohoo! A pause. Then, the ones who never left. The hum became a roar. Zalvok screamed as the darkness came alive. Zalvok had seen many horrors in his lifetime. He had led planetary invasions, watched cities burn, and heard the dying screams of countless enemies. He had thought himself immune to fear. But now, standing on the bridge of the Warbringer, he realized something terrifying. This was not a battle. This was a hunt, and he was the prey. The darkness spreads. The Warbringer was the pride of the Drex Dominion, a vessel so large that smaller ships could dock inside it. Its hull was forged from the strongest metals in the galaxy. Its shields could withstand the force of a collapsing star. And yet, none of it mattered. Because this enemy did not use weapons. This enemy did not fire missiles or energy blasts. This enemy was the darkness itself. It moved through the corridors like a living shadow, swallowing crew members whole. The screams of the fallen echoed through the ship. Short, sharp bursts of terror that were quickly silenced. One by one, his officers were disappearing. And not just aboard the Warbringer. Across the entire fleet, ship after ship vanished. No explosions, no wreckage. Just gone. The desperate plan. Zalvok's claws dug into his armrests. He turned to his remaining officers. Report. The surviving crew members were shaking. One of them, a tactical officer, stammered, My lord, we cannot detect anything. The human fleet is not present. There is no enemy. Zalvok slammed his fist onto the console. Then what is attacking us? Silence. Then his science officer, Sorvin, spoke in a hollow voice. It is not an attack. Zalvok turned sharply. Explain. Sorvin's hands trembled as he pulled up the sensor logs. There are no external forces acting upon our ships. No weapons fire, no energy readings, no gravitational shifts. Nothing. He swallowed hard. Something inside our ships is taking us. Zalvok's blood ran cold. What do you mean inside? Sorvin's face paled. It's in our minds. The bridge crew froze. Zalvok's breathing became shallow. You're telling me that this is a whisper. Not over the comms, not through the ship's speakers. Inside his head. You are not the first. Zalvok's vision blurred. He could see, feel, something moving in the corners of his mind. Images that were not his own. Memories that did not belong to him. Dead fleets. Ancient wars. A warning, repeated over centuries. Stay away from Earth. The truth revealed. Zalvok gasped and forced himself back to reality. How do we stop this? How do we fight? Sorvin hesitated. There may be one way. He pulled up a data file, something old, older than the Drex Dominion itself, a record from the first explorers who encountered Earth. Sorvin said. It was buried deep in the archives, ignored, dismissed as superstition. Zalvok read the report. His throat tightened. Thousands of years ago, an ancient empire, far more advanced than the Drexis, had come to conquer Earth. They were never heard from again. No ships returned. No distress signals. Only a single message was found, left drifting in the void. Earth does not belong to humans alone. Zalvok's grip on the console tightened. Then what does it belong to? Sorvin's voice was barely a whisper. The ones who were here before them. The bridge fell into silence. Then the lights flickered. and Zalvok felt something breathe down his neck. Zalvok spun around, claws extended, but there was nothing there. Nothing visible. Yet the feeling remained, the unmistakable presence of something ancient watching him, breathing down his neck, waiting. The bridge was silent, yet the air felt thick, heavy, pressing down on his chest like the weight of an ocean. The remaining officers on the bridge were pale, their eyes darting around as if they too could feel something unseen lurking just beyond their perception. "This is impossible," one of the officers whispered, voice barely audible. "There is nothing there. Nothing on the scanners. Nothing attacking." But they all knew that was a lie. Something was happening, something beyond their understanding. Zalvok forced himself to focus. He had led countless battles, survived against overwhelming odds, but this was something different, something he could not fight with weapons or strategy. His mind raced as he recalled Sorvin's words, the ones who were here before them. The warning had always been there. The message left drifting in space. Earth does not belong to humans alone. He turned sharply to Sorvin. If this thing, this presence, has been here before, then someone must have survived long enough to leave that message. Someone must have known what it was. Sorvin swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he worked through the data records, searching, sifting through ancient reports, classified information buried deep within the Dominion's archives. And then he found it. A name. A long-forgotten record from a species wiped out centuries ago. The Valteri. A race that had once ruled vast portions of the galaxy, expanding their empire with an iron grip, much like the Drex Dominion. They had invaded many worlds, conquered countless civilizations. Then, one day, they reached a small blue planet on the edge of a quiet star system, Earth. Their armada had arrived in force, expecting an easy conquest. What they found instead was something they never understood. A force that moved through their ships, not as an army, but as whispers in the dark. A silent plague that could not be fought, could not be reasoned with. It did not destroy them in battle. It erased them from existence, mind by mind, soul by soul. The Valteri's final message had been discovered floating in the void, a distress beacon activated in their last desperate moments. The recording was garbled, filled with static, but the voice was unmistakably that of a being overcome by terror. Not the humans. The others. The others. They were never meant to live. The recording cut off. That was the last trace of the Valteri. Their empire crumbled soon after, as if whatever had taken them on Earth had not been satisfied, as if it had followed them back. Zalvok's blood ran cold. The truth was now clear. The humans were not what the galaxy feared. It was what had once called Earth home before them. A species long forgotten. A species that should have died out. A species that had never truly left. The bridge shook violently as warning sirens blared. Reports came in from what little remained of the fleet. Ships were vanishing at an even faster rate. Entire crews disappearing mid-sentence, their vessels drifting lifelessly in space. It was spreading. Then the lights flickered once more, and the whisper returned. You should not have come. It was not a single voice. It was many, layered atop one another, speaking from every direction and from inside their minds. The officers screamed, clutching their heads, as the presence pressed in, suffocating, crushing their very thoughts. Zalvok staggered back, his vision blurring. He could see something, not with his eyes, but with his mind. Shadows moving, shapes flickering in and out of existence, something that did not belong in this reality. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A childhood story, a tale meant to scare younglings into obedience. The darkness that watches, an ancient myth about creatures that lurked in the void, feeding on those who strayed too far. But it was no myth. It had been real all along. And now, he and his fleet were nothing more than prey. The whisper came again, colder this time. There is no escape. Zalvok knew then that it was over. The Dominion had made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. They had not just provoked humanity. They had disturbed something much worse. And now it was awake. The silence that followed was unnatural. Not the absence of sound, but something deeper, something that devoured noise, swallowing it before it could even exist. Zelvok felt it in his bones, an emptiness creeping into his very being. The air was thick with dread, pressing down on him like an unseen force. The bridge was barely functional now. Systems flickered, screens displayed gibberish symbols that twisted and warped as if they were alive. The remaining crew clung to their seats, eyes wide, sweat beading on their foreheads. They had been warriors once, proud soldiers of the Dominion's great fleet. Now they were nothing more than insects trapped in a web, spun by something infinitely older and far more powerful than they could comprehend. Zelvok knew the truth. It was over. But he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. With a sharp motion, he turned to Sorvin, the only officer still able to function. "Tell me we still have something left," he said, his voice hoarse. Sorvin's trembling hands flew over the console, desperately searching for any remaining systems under their control. "We have partial thrusters," he gasped. "Weapons are offline. Communications error." He stopped, eyes widening. "Communications are active." Zelvok's heart pounded. "Who are we connected to?" Sorvin hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. Zelvok's blood ran cold. The transmission wasn't coming from another Dominion vessel. It wasn't coming from any known frequency. It was coming from Earth. A single message played, over and over, repeating in an endless loop. A voice, human in tone but distorted, layered, like it was speaking from beyond a vast abyss. "Leave, before they notice you." Zelvok's breathing became shallow. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning. And that meant there was still a chance. "We have to leave," he said, forcing himself to stand, gripping the edges of his command chair like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "Now." "But the fleet," Sorvin started. "There is no fleet," Zelvok snapped. He gestured toward the screen displaying the battle. What was once a mighty armada had been reduced to lifeless husks, drifting in the void. Ships that had once housed thousands were now nothing but empty shells, their crews erased from existence. The whispers were growing louder now, pressing against their skulls like claws raking through their thoughts. Sorvin's eyes filled with understanding. Without another word, he engaged the thrusters. The ship groaned in protest, barely holding itself together as it turned. Fleeing from the battlefield was no longer a battlefield but a graveyard. The moment they moved, the darkness reacted. The ship's hull screamed as reality itself seemed to twist around them. The whispers became voices, countless voices, screaming, laughing, whispering things that should never be heard by mortal ears. Zelvok clutched his head, fighting against the madness. Then, silence. It was gone. The ship burst out of the anomaly, the distortion vanishing behind them. The void was still. The stars returned to their rightful places. The oppressive force that had been crushing them was no longer there. Zelvok gasped for breath, staring at the blackness beyond the viewport. The shadows remained, distant now, but watching, always watching. He turned to Sorvin. "Send a message to the Dominion." His voice was barely above a whisper. Tell them to never return here." Sorvin nodded. No words were needed. They had seen enough. As the ship limped away from Earth, Zelvok allowed himself a final glance at the planet. The humans had never needed to defend themselves. They had never needed to prove their strength, because something else had been protecting them all along. And now it was awake.